Hello and welcome to the More to Life podcast. I am your host, Elle Mace, and today we have another guest with us. We have the amazing Amy Rushworth. Hi, Amy.
Hi, woohoo, thank you.
Amy, you are many things, one of which an empowerment coach, but I will going to pass you over as always to give yourself a bit more of a detailed explanation of who you are.
Yeah, so I'm Amy Rushworth, empowerment coach, specializing specifically in the areas that I feel like women are taught to be small or ashamed or to sit down and shut up. So that ranges from everything from sexual wellness and, in some of my programs, it's like learning how to squat. And then in some programs, it's like money and business and spirituality and using your voice and expressing yourself. So I have this burning passion for the taboo areas where women sort of deep down crave to be more empowered or more brave or more courageous within or in their lives in some way. And so these are like the areas that I specialize in rather than just like one niche, but it's all about women's power, living your best life and always living life on your terms.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, I love that. Well, the fact that you just said taboo subjects, I'm like, oh, let's get it in there. I cannot wait. But I love your Instagram. I've actually been following you for a long time, but one of your bit on your bio says to be unapologetically you. And I think that is just so relevant at the moment and just so powerful when people can step into that in that place of being themselves, even though it is so scary to do that.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, so many women, and I include myself in that equation, have some kind of perfectionism or what I sometimes label as like good girl conditioning or good girl syndrome. And how it shows up can be, different for each of us. Some of us that can show up as, not feeling comfortable expressing the taboo things, even though they're true, even though you think them in your head, you don't actually vocalize them or verbalize them in your life. For some people, it can be being a people pleaser and not standing up for yourself and not advocating for yourself, saying yes when you mean no. For some people, it's, in the realm of their sexuality or relationships. And then, for many of us, it's like moral perfectionism. So we want to be seen as a good person. And so we're terrified of saying the wrong thing or making a mistake. And that's compounded in the culture that we're in by like cancel culture and this culture that demands perfection from women. And we demand it from ourselves. And so when I talk and teach about being unapologetic, it's about, deconditioning from all of those rules so that you can actually emerge and step forward as the woman that you're born to be and live life on your terms. So that, one day you're going to look back on your life and you can ask yourself, did I live it for me? And my intention for everyone I work with is that they can say, fuck yes, I did.
Yeah, amazing. Oh, I love that. I'm already feeling like, yes, I need to do the same now. Come on. So I'm kind of guessing that you've got a bit of a story about yourself into how you actually got to be doing this sort of stuff. So would you just share with us then, like your background, what's been going on for you? How have you got into what you do?
Yeah, so I'm 32 now, and my journey started when I was like 21, 22. And I was a very different person back at that age. I think a lot of us are, but I was like such the polar opposite to how I am now. So at that time, what kind of catalyzed into my journey of what I do and my own healing journey was the result of a PTSD diagnosis. So I'd been in like a long downward spiral, but I had this really like uncanny ability to like keep a lid on myself. So I could like make everything perfect on the outside, even though I was self-destructing and spiraling down internally. So on paper, on the surface, my life looked really good. I had worked really hard to get my degree. I got an amazing job right out of university. I was living the dream at Bondi Beach, living by myself. Like I was in quite a senior role when I was 21, 22 years old. And on the weekends, or like several times a week, I would go out and get like blackout drunk or take drugs, or I'd smoke so many cigarettes. And I had like a toxic dynamic going on in my love life. So on the surface, everything looked fantastic, but actually my life was imploding very slowly and dramatically from within. And I was very, very depressed and anxious. And so it was when I started having panic attacks, and I kept getting very physically ill. I ended up with pneumonia as well, that I had to take a really long, hard look in the mirror and be like, I'm not okay. I was having suicidal ideation, and that's also why I decided to go to therapy. And I got that diagnosis that I had PTSD. And so from there, I sort of hit rock bottom pretty intensely and started rebuilding my life with the help of my therapist. And I was doing some personal development, starting to wean myself off some of my addictions. And I started asking myself every day, like, what choices would I make if I respected myself? So not even like if I loved myself, because I didn't really love myself. And that was a bit far away at the time to sort of understand that concept or to feel it. But I would start making little choices based in self-respect, and slowly started changing and healing, and a different version of me started emerging. I started making completely different choices, setting boundaries, not being such a doormat, not participating in my own self-harm via my behaviors, addictions, and habits. And eventually that healing journey went deeper and deeper and deeper. And I feel like I healed my PTSD, and I became a facilitator in this, realm, in this industry. So, yeah.
Oh, wow. Okay. So just touching on those kind of like addiction pieces, would you mind just sort of like going into what those were, what that kind of looked like for you?
I was just like addicted to taking anything to the extreme, right? But always remaining cool, calm, and collected on the outside. So as long as I looked like the good girl on the inside, I would do like the bad girl things behind the scenes. So instead of being able to just go out and have like one glass of wine, I would go out sometimes like 4 or 5 nights a week until like 5 in the morning, have 2 hours of sleep, and then do a full day of work and like doing my work perfectly the next day. So overworking, over partying. Sometimes I was smoking like 25 cigarettes a day, literally like to the point where it was like no one can actually smoke that many cigarettes a day because they enjoy it. I was physically like suppressing my emotions through smoking cigarettes and harming myself through cigarettes. And what I know now that I'm, in the world of like holistic healing and like energy work, is that I was suppressing a lot of grief, and the lungs hold our grief. So I also don't think it was very surprising that it was like getting pneumonia that knocked me on my ass, like a condition in my lungs. It's not surprising to me that that happened, and that was like a really big emotional wake-up call for me as well. That sort of prompted me to get into therapy as well. So also addicted to bad boys. So, just walking red flags, and I was enjoying the carnival. And just, even in friendships, like I would say that I'm quite a like fierce, self-loving person now. Like I'm really good with my boundaries, and I'm really generous in my relationships, but I also know like my limits and the parameters for relationships. But back then I didn't. So even some of my friendships were very like wounded and rooted in codependency and rooted in trying to please, my friends, and not advocate for myself or make choices that were good for me. So yeah, basically just like all sorts of little addictions with all the things that were not very healthy for me.
Yeah. Or that kind of like momentarily you feel better and then you have to go back for more and more and more. So with the at what point did you know that you had PTSD? Did you know this before you saw a therapist? Or did like not that you knew you had PTSD, but just like I know there is something that is making me do all these things.
Oh no, I literally had no idea. And when my therapist told me this, I was so shocked. And I was almost like gaslighting myself about it for a while because my understanding of PTSD was extremely limited. And it was that stereotype of like people who go to war
Mm,
have PTSD. And so I felt like guilty or almost like fraudulent hearing that, because I was like, I'm this privileged white girl who's like had a, you know, pretty good, safe like upbringing in many ways. Like, who am I to like have that diagnosis? And then that was also reflected to me. Like, I told someone in my family, I finally got the courage up to tell them about it, and they like basically mirrored back that same feedback of like, I don't think you have that. Like, people go to war and get that, not you. And so there was like a lot of shame around it, but I was able to have that safe space with my therapist to unpack some of those feelings and to unpack like why I had that PTSD. And it was 2 years later when I was out of therapy that some of like the original trauma memories actually resurfaced. So it was like 2 years into healing the journey that I remembered some of the root traumas. But my PTSD was complex PTSD. So it wasn't just one thing. But I do remember one of the big things that happened, and that only came back to my memory 2 years later.
wow. Gosh, it's crazy, isn't it? What we can actually block out, whether it's growing up or, you know, even in the present mind, what we don't want to remember. We can do such a good job of just sort of like erasing that from our memories, but then it still lives within us.
Yeah. It was like completely suppressed because I think my trauma response was to dissociate. And, you know, that's how I was also living my life, dissociated. So, you know, how could I be working 12-hour days and then going out till 5 in the morning, drinking sometimes a whole bottle of vodka, smoking 25 cigarettes and be functioning for that long? Like, truly, it the only way that I was able to sustain that for as long as I could is because I was living completely dissociated and in survival mode, but I didn't realize it at the time. Genuinely, like, I didn't think there was anything wrong with my behavior. I wasn't like curious about why I was doing those things at the time. I just thought I'm just fucked up and this is what I do. You know, it was just kind of like normalized until it got really serious. And then I started realizing, like, hey, this isn't actually normal. And there's probably some really deep shame or trauma underneath these coping mechanisms.
Yeah, definitely. And do you, so you said you healed your PTSD. Do you still feel like there's kind of more to come from that? Or do you feel like actually that is a closed door? I'm like all really all good with it?
I mean, I don't know if we're ever fully healed in general, like healed in inverted commas,
Yeah.
right? There are always new things that come up. And, you know, like after doing my therapy and being 2 years into that journey, I didn't expect to then get another like series of flashbacks, you know? So I never claimed to be like this almighty knowing expert on healing myself or anyone else. But I think quite remarkably for me is that I feel like I've neutralized a lot of the trauma responses that I used to have. So I'm able to feel my emotions. I don't dissociate. So I found like a really healthy balance now between, you know, letting my emotions be felt and tapping into the sensitivity that I had when I was a little girl before I shut it off. But I also take like the good parts of having been through you know, trauma and hardships in my life. I feel like I'm really resilient, and I feel like I'm able to compartmentalize quite well when I need to, which can be a really good thing also. So I feel like I'm in a really, really good place with everything. And yeah, let's see. There are
Yeah.
always new things to unpack though. So we'll
Yeah.
see.
It's a forever a journey, isn't it? Like you kind of, well, I found for me personally, like I think, oh, there's this big thing I need to heal and move through. And then I do it, and that might take 6 months or 2 years or whatever. And then something else crops up, or you get a bit more strength to go a bit deeper. And also, you know, we're forever growing and forever having relationships with people, etc. So there's always going to be new things. So you touched on the fact that you were kind of going for the bad boys and like you had some, you know, probably toxic friendships. So how did you make sure you made that change? What did you do to kind of like set out to find somebody or to just improve the relationships that you were having?
So I started setting some boundaries because, you know, I was asking myself that question, what would I do if I respected myself? And it became very clear right away that there was a lot of choices, even small ones, that were not rooted in self-respect. They were rooted in trying to please others or trying to not be rejected, trying to keep people close, trying to be the good girl, you know, trying to keep the peace, whatever situation it was. There was this flavor of the good girl and perfectionism there. So as I started setting boundaries with others and also with myself in terms of like, you know, how much I was drinking, and I eventually, you know, went sober for a while, I did lose some people, you know, like people don't like it when you go from being a doormat to like suddenly having needs and boundaries, you know, they're like, who is this? And I think it's like, it's an understandable reaction if you just completely change from the person that was convenient and you know, normal to this person. They're going to maybe either take some time to adjust to that, or they're not going to like it because you don't fit like the narrative they want anymore. So there was, you know, the pain of losing some friendships, some friendships having to transition. It was quite a lonely time for me in the beginning when I was healing, but I did have my therapist, and I did have, you know, one or two people who were really supportive of me. And I just kind of rebuilt my life in all the ways. And that included rebuilding some friendships and finding and seeking out new people that could meet me where I was at and where I was going.
Yeah, and that's it, isn't it? It's like one door closes, but another one always opens. And sometimes that's what has to happen with friendships. You can't,
Yeah.
you have to give space to new ones to flourish.
Yeah, totally. I mean, a few years into my healing journey, I was doing a lot of personal development seminars, and I stopped drinking. And one of my like lifelong friends got so angry at me and literally like verbally abused me for not drinking anymore. And, you know, said some really awful things to me at the time. I was like a brand new business owner, and was saying like, I hope nobody shows up to your event this weekend, serves you right for like ditching me and not coming out with me anymore. And it was so painful and upsetting to me because at the time I was healing and trying to like function whilst having these flashbacks of like extremely traumatic sexual abuse. And so I was not drinking because I was like, if I drink when I'm in this state, like I'm not going to be okay, you know? And I hadn't told her exactly what was going on because I didn't feel safe to be sharing that with just anyone. But it was really hard because I felt very misunderstood. I felt rejected, and I felt like I was being punished for doing what was right by me, by doing what was right for me. And I think a lot of people resonate with this. Like if you've ever had to end a friendship or like break up with someone that you really care about, but you're like, I have to do this in order to honor myself, or I have to make this change in order to be healthy and to like be true to myself. It doesn't make it any easier having to do that, you know? But in hindsight, what you do realize is like making mistakes in alignment with your needs, your well-being, and your desires, like that is always going to be an investment that pays off, even if it's really hard during like the breakdown in the beginning.
Yeah, totally. That, like you say, that like authentic alignment always wins, doesn't it? And it might not feel like it in the day or even that month or that year, But always when you look back, you think that was definitely the right decision and that had to be
Yeah.
done.
Yeah.
Definitely.
And this friend, she apologized to me, but she apologized to me 5 years later. Right. So
Oh,
I wasn't holding my breath. But the thing is like sometimes you disappoint people in the moment. And when you change, sometimes that hurts people because they don't want you to change, right? They want you to be the person that they know and love. So like we can understand it. But sometimes you're not going to get that validation, even though what you're doing is the right thing to do. So even if like pursuing a certain calling for yourself or making a big change in your life, even though you might not be getting that initial support and validation, number one, you might get it later, and then you're going to realize like, oh my God, I'm so glad I did it. Because imagine if I didn't, just because this person had negative feedback. Or number two, like you never get validation, but you get to actually live a life that's completely true to you and makes you happy. And the people who love you ideally should want you to be happy and do what's best for you. So sometimes our relationships have to transition.
yeah, they do. And even if like, you've got that drinking friend and then you're no longer drinking with them, if they're that true friend, you'll be able to find another common ground, or there'll be something else that you can enjoy doing, spending time together. Like if it's just reliant on drinking, then maybe they're not supposed to be there anyway.
Yeah, look, I realized when I stopped drinking, or even when I started drinking less, that I didn't have as many friends as I thought I did. I realized when I had pneumonia and PTSD and I had no one to bring me medicine to my house, it was a very shocking, lonely slap of reality of like, I actually don't have that many good friends or like high quality relationships because of like these addictions and because of how I'm showing up. I'm not forming those meaningful, loyal relationships that I truly want because I'm also not being the kind of person that a loyal, devoted friend would want to be friends with.
Yeah. Yeah, that's it. I love that. So what you've done there is you've recognized that actually you don't have these friendships that you want, but then you spun it to, well, am I being this friend that other people may want as well? Kind of like, is my behaviors reflecting this?
100%. It's easy to like hit rock bottom and look around and blame everyone else, to blame the things that have happened, to blame the people who are like disloyal or who are fair weather friends. I think that it takes like some serious, like big dick energy and like humility and also courage to look at like how have I participated in my own suffering. And I think that that actually gives you so much confidence and power when you do that, because you are not powerless in that situation. You have a side of the street that you can be responsible for. And if you go and clean up your side of the street and look at, okay, where am I going to raise my standards for myself? What habits am I going to say no to? And what habits am I going to say yes to? Because I deeply respect myself, or I want to deeply respect myself. When you do that, because it's not easy to do that, something in your brain changes where you realize, like, I'm not a helpless little girl where life is just happening to me. Like, I get to co-create the kind of life I have. And I'm going to go co-create the life that I really desire instead of waiting for it to just fall in my lap. And I know that that's like tough love advice for a lot of people, but I say it because like I really fucking believe in people's ability to do this. And sometimes you need like a loving, like tough person to be like, you're better than this. Step up, step up and do better for yourself and give yourself the life that you deserve and heal so that you can give yourself the life you deserve. And I also know because that's what I did.
Yeah,
Because I was a mess.
yeah, it is a bit of tough love, isn't it? Like, yes, there's not, what you're not saying there is, I don't care how anxious or depressed you may feel, like you've just got to get on with it. No, it's, you appreciate that, and that is what's going on for so many people. But ultimately, it is you that makes that decision to make that change and to do things differently and create the life you want, that you love. So you've touched a little bit on sexual abuse, and then I'm not gonna go down that route today, but you then at the start of the call said, which I love, and I'll probably squirt, I'm even saying this, but you said about women and squirting. So I'm guessing you've experienced some really some sexual trauma here. And now you're kind of like in this place where you're like supporting women and being their sexuality and making the most out of sex by the sounds of it. How did you manage that? Because that's a huge transition.
Yeah. So, I mean, I feel like I am a great person to teach on this because I have that very like traumatic history with my own body and my own sexuality. Like my first sexual experience was being like very intensely violated as a child, you know, as a little girl. And so it's like, I sort of see myself as like, I like to go first. I like to be a leader and I like to bring other women up with me and say, look, like, I know it feels impossible for you to do A, B, and C, but I'm telling you, like, it's possible to create a new story, to heal, to feel completely differently about something that you never thought you could feel differently about. And so I like to be that kind of teacher that isn't just like talking down and teaching principles, but really like in the trenches with my clients and saying, like, I know that you can do this. The possibilities are endless for you. So I went on a big journey of therapy, of course, which is like a top-down approach. So the mind and, you know, having space held for me to articulate feelings around my trauma and my narratives around it. But then I also explored a bottom-up approach, so a more somatic, body-based approach to healing with modalities, you know, like Tantra and, you know, different things that stem off from that, and working with the body, working with the breath to release some of the trauma from my body somatically. And, you know, I started getting more sensation back in my body, you know, because I'd had that dissociation before. I started being able to have healthier relationships with men and with my sexuality. And I started feeling like empowered and not choked up to speak about sex or to celebrate it or to see it as like another beautiful aspect of my womanhood. And so then I trained in it, and then I offer like a signature course in this area called Pleasure Empress. And, you know, I wanted to create the kind of course that I wish existed when I was going on this journey, so that, you know, women can unshame their bodies, so they can unshame self-pleasure, so that they can like actually understand their body and how it's designed to feel really good, instead of feeling like they're trapped in their body, or like their body is just an object that's meant to be like thinner or smaller or look a different way. I wanted women to understand like your body can feel so many different things, and there's nothing to be ashamed about when it comes to your anatomy or to touching yourself or to just feeling really deeply confident in that area. So yeah, that's kind of like the long story of my journey and then how it morphed into being a teacher in this area. But, you know, I think it's one of my most popular programs. People love that program because it's like a really deep source of empowerment, women's sexuality.
Well, I'm thinking like, you know, how many women do I know that actually feel completely comfortable to either touch themselves or talk about it openly? Very, very small amount. So there is so much like room for this. So that what you're doing there is such an amazing job, because, you know, it should be more of a conversation. It shouldn't be shameful. And it is, it comes with so much shame.
Yeah. And, you know, it's a lot of what we also talk about in Pleasure Empress is like the reasons for that conditioning. Because logically, a lot of women know, like, yeah, when they think about it, they go, yeah, why is that weird? Why do I feel weird about that? But then they still feel weird about it.
Yeah.
And we talk about like why that is. And, you know, a lot of this is to do with patriarchal suppression of women, because prior to, you know, like the Inquisition and the domination of sort of Western religions and the church, when there was these more sort of matriarchal focused cultures, or paganism was like one of the main traditions in many cultures, these cultures and traditions centered women's sexuality as like a force of divine power. So, you know, goddesses and, you know, the mother Gaia were worshipped because it was like women bring life to the planet. And where do we bring life through? Our vaginas and our wombs. And
Oh
so when it
yeah.
was like to say it in really like layman's terms, when the men came along and we were like, we want to create a patriarchy and have like mostly men in power and a male-centered view of the world and success, how do we suppress these women? Let's suppress the power source between their legs and let's make them afraid of it and let's vilify it. Let's make them afraid of, you know, tapping into that womb power, tapping into their normal primal ways of being, so that they're nice and neat and suppressed and quiet, and they're not going to come for the throne. They're not going to come for the power. And so then we moved into these gender roles, many of which have been influenced by these like suppressive narratives around women's sexuality. And so we suppressed our power, and we feel like it's dangerous on some primal level to talk about sex. You know, like it's weird and dangerous and taboo.
Yeah, exactly. Weird and dangerous. And I think that's so right, because when you do get into a conversation about it, you may be with your closest friends, but and if you're not, then you will think, what do they think of me saying that? What, you know, I've just said, you'd almost get the fear of like having that conversation when you walk away from it. Did I say too much? Should I have, you know, should I have said that? And so yeah, you feel like it's the dangerous conversation to be having.
Yeah, because you'll feel like you could be slut shamed.
Yeah.
You might also have that fear that if you are too sexually open or expressive, that other women might be jealous and competitive with you or see you as a threat.
Yeah.
Which, you know, that is very scary or triggering for some people, because we want to belong to each other as women. We want to be interdependent. We don't want to necessarily be in competition with other women or to be rejected, to have our sister wounds activated. So, you know, there's so many sneaky, like complicated layers to this stuff. And so that's why I sort of try and speak about these things really visibly and unapologetically, because why should we be ashamed of something that is completely natural, that is good for our health? Having sex and self-pleasure is good for your hormones and good for your health and your relationships and your relationship to yourself. And everyone's doing it. Pretty much everyone is having sex or like using their vibrator or, you know, getting turned on. And it's happening, but we're not talking about it. It makes up a really big part of our lives. So I want to kind of like derail the stigma around it for women so that they can just be turned on and amazing and just unashamed.
Unashamed. I love that. So anyone listening now, your mission today or tomorrow is to find yourself in an environment that makes you feel a little bit nervous to talk about this, but to open up the conversation and to talk about it. And so just on that, for those people that are like, okay, I'm going to do that, because I think everyone wants to, it's just making that step to do it. So you doing what you do now, when you first started talking about it on your open Instagram and everything, what was the reaction? I mean, you may have really liberal parents and family, etc., but what was the reaction from your kind of closest people?
Well, my family doesn't really like say anything. My parents are really I mean, they have their opinions, but they keep them to themselves because they made a pact when I was born, my mom and my dad, that they were going to like rewrite or like break the cycle of their lineage. So like they had felt very like judged, or like they had to live up to certain expectations of their own parents. And so they kind of made this agreement that when they have kids, that they would just let us be who we wanted to be.
Yeah.
And so they've been really great in terms of that. However, like maybe in two years ago, I did get on a Zoom call with my dad, and he must have like seen some sort of reel that I'd made. He must have been looking at me from like his burner account or something.
Yeah.
And he saw this reel or something, and he answered the Zoom call and he said, "Hello, high priestess of orgasms." And I was like, "Sorry, what, mate?" I always fell off my chair. He's like, "I heard you're the high priestess of orgasms," which I hadn't said, but he clearly thought it would be funny to make an awkward joke.
Yeah.
So I guess I'm kind of lucky in that. And, you know, I did kind of worry that maybe my husband's mom might have a problem with what I talk about because she's quite Christian.
Yeah.
And, you know, even a lot of Christians don't really like you. Obviously, this is generalizing because there's all different kinds of Christians, right? But some Christians don't like you even talking about tarot cards or astrology, let alone like talking about how to use a jade egg and put a crystal in your vagina, you know? So I was like, oh, I don't know how she's gonna react to this if she ever sees my Instagram. But I think she's seen it and she's like, go girl, you know, like she's never said anything to me and has always been very like encouraging and supportive. So I think I feel like I've lucked out in terms of the people around me.
Yeah.
But I do have no shortage, of course, of people on the internet who you know, very judgmental or like triggered towards some of the things I say.
Well, that's social, isn't it? That's social media. But it looks like to me that you are just like, okay, you do you, and I'm just gonna do me. Thank you.
Yeah, totally. I know that some of these conversations or even just the way that I talk about them is too much for some people. And you know, some of those people come around a few years later and then they're actually like, you know what? I'm like,
Yeah.
I'm not so suppressed anymore and I actually love what you're saying. What you're saying is true. And I was annoyed because like deep down I knew it was true. Deep down I wanted to be more bold and expressed. And then some people I'm just like not their flavor, which is absolutely fine. You know, like I don't expect everyone to be on the internet talking about squirting. Like to me, you can be in a button-up shirt and long pants and be a sexually awakened woman, like in the privacy of your home. Like we all have a different way that we express it. But because I'm a teacher of this work, I try and like, you know, be the one on the front line, destigmatizing the entire like shebang for everyone else.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. I'm really excited about what you just said, putting crystals up your vagina. I think we need another episode on how to put crystals up your vagina and the benefits. I'm going to Google that later. But Amy, it's been such a pleasure. Thank you so much. So where can everyone find you?
My Instagram is This Is Amy Rushworth, or my podcast is Amy Rushworth Show, amyrushworth.com. Yeah,
Amazing.
easy to remember.
I'll be putting all of this in the notes as well, in the show notes. So thank you so much. Have a lovely day. And yeah,
Thank you.
enjoy crystals up your vagina.
I will.